Hi, we're here today to talk about Facebook's earnings. They announced their Q3 earnings, $6.8 billion in revenue for Q3. What I wanted to do today is to deconstruct some of those numbers and help you understand how many ads Facebook has to serve to generate $6.8 billion in ads revenue. So let's start out over here. I'm just going to throw some numbers up on the board here. So Q3 was what they just reported. And the $6.8 billion is what I just said here on the advertising revenue. Again, that's billion with a B, so we're talking very large numbers here. And so that's the revenue number. And then let's look at unique users here. That's actually another really important part of this, is how many people did it take for them to generate the $6.8 billion in revenue? Well, it turns out there's 1.8 billion people around the world who use Facebook. So significant numbers around the world, significant portion of the whole population on the planet uses Facebook. The daily active user number is a little bit lower than that. It's about 1.1, I think 1.2 billion people log into Facebook on any given day. You could use that number in these calculations, but we'll just go with the 1.8 and keep things simple for this point. And then ultimately you want to know, okay, how many dollars per user does that translate into? And what that turns into is $3.81 per user is what Facebook made in Q3. So that's what they just announced. Just for reference here, though, I'm going to annualize this and multiply these numbers by 4 and say, what would these Q3 numbers be across the entire year? And you'll see the numbers get to be pretty breathtaking here. $27.3 billion in revenue. Of course, the users, you don't multiply them by 4. It's still 1.8 billion users, significant number. And then the dollars per user over the course of a year instead of a quarter is $15.25. And that ends up being a very important number that we're going to keep coming back to. So what this says is that Facebook is making $15.25 per user over the course of the year. How are they doing that? They're doing that with advertising. Advertising is about 97% of Facebook's revenue, and that's how they're making all their money. You say, okay, well, $15.25 doesn't sound like that much from me as a Facebook user or you as a Facebook user, but again, you multiply that across 1.8 billion people around the world, and that's how you end up with such breathtaking numbers. Again, there's a lot of complexities here we're going to not attribute to or deal with right now, including, how does that vary around the world? Audiences in different countries have different values, and there's plenty of complexity you can add, and there's lots of ways to look at this. We're just trying to provide a high-level summary here so that you can see how these numbers add up and ultimately what their ad load ends up being. So let's talk about ad load. What do I mean by ad load? That's how many ads do you see in your Facebook feed, probably on your mobile device as you're scrolling through. Are you going to see a Facebook advertisement every second or third or fifth or 10th story? And so what I want to do is give you a sense of how these numbers play out and what we can infer from their ad load. They don't necessarily publish these numbers, but we can make some educated guesses and maybe back in and try to understand how, again, they're adding up to this $15.25 per user. So the first thing we have to do is define a little bit of terminology. Those of you in the digital advertising business are quite familiar with CPM, cost per thousand impressions. That's the standard baseline way of measuring advertising, 1,000 impressions. There are a lot of other ways to measure as well. You can do cost per view, CPV, cost per click, CPC. Again, there's lots of complexity. Just like the geographic complexity could really make this story more robust, it doesn't fundamentally change the nature of what we're trying to explain here. So we're just going to go with CPM-based pricing, and let's assume that all of that $15.25 per user over the course of the year comes from CPM-based advertising. And that'll make the calculations a little simpler and straightforward here. So rather than calling this eye or whatever, I'm just going to draw a little eyeball here. And every time you see an eyeball, that's talking about impressions here. And so that's what we ultimately want to solve for, is how many impressions is it going to take? So we just need to solve a simple little equation here. If we have our impressions here as represented by our eyeball, and we divide by 1,000, because remember it's cost per 1,000 impressions, and then we multiply by the dollar CPM price. And so what that is how much does it cost for me to advertise on Facebook? And we're going to start out and just assume a number of $4. And that number is actually going to vary. Facebook sells its advertising space at auction. So if you buy a very narrow and targeted audience, it's going to be a higher price. If you buy a very broad and less targeted audience, the price will be lower. And that price varies based on your targeting criteria, who you're trying to reach, and a whole other host of factors, including how much in demand that audience is. It's essentially an auction process. So if we assume here for a second that we're going to start out and say that there's a $4 CPM, and we'll come back to that number and show you how that varies with some different numbers. And what that equals is the total cost of a campaign. And since what we're trying to do is figure out how many impressions add up to a $15 $1.25 value per user. That's what we're trying to solve for over the course of this equation here. So just go with this math. I won't take you through it. You know how to solve these equations, I'm sure. And so if you take the eyeball and solve for that, what it ends up being is 3,812. That's impressions per user per year. And let's stop and think about that for a second. That says that Facebook, in order to generate the value that it's created, that we've been talking about, has to serve 3,812 ads per user per year. And that sounds like a tremendous amount. It's like, holy cow, 3,800 ads sounds like way more than I would ever want to watch. But if you actually boil this down and you convert it to a daily total, you're really only talking about 10.4 ads per user per day. That number seems a lot more reasonable. Again, think about how you use Facebook. Think about scrolling through your Facebook feed on your desktop or on your mobile device. If you consume 30, 40, 50 stories over the course of a day, you're very likely going to see 10 ads. That's not really that large of a number. And so again, Facebook serving 10.4 ads per day generates $6.8 billion in quarterly revenue. So pretty staggering number right there. So that's the basic arithmetic, how this works. So let's dive in right now and talk about how I told you this number, this $4 CPM number could vary. So how would that number vary if I basically said, okay, imagine I change the CPM and I have a $3 CPM or a $4 CPM or a $5 CPM, and we could make as many numbers as we wanted here, but I'll just go with these three for illustrative purposes. That changes that number up here from 10.4 to 13.9 if it was a $3 CPM. So again, you have to serve more ads if the cost is lower in order to generate the same amount of revenue. We just already decided that this was 10.4, you know what that number is. And then you get down to 8.4 if the price went up to a $5 CPM, they'd have to serve fewer ads. And so that gives you a sense of what we're talking about here, ranging from 13.9 ads per user to 8.4 ads per user, depending on the price and the CPM that they're able to charge across the average of all of the ads they take. So let's show you what that means a little bit graphically here. So if I just draw a really simple graph here of what the CPM would look like is as the ads per day that you serve on the y-axis and the average cost down along the bottom x-axis, this graph is going to look something like this. And what that says is, again, as your average CPM decreases, you have to serve a lot more ads. As your average CPM increases, you have to serve a lot fewer ads. So that's the shape of that curve, and we could calculate out to whatever level of detail what that would look like. But that's the shape of the demand curve that you're going to see on any kind of digital advertising. Again, as you're able to charge more, you need to deliver fewer units. It's not just limited to digital advertising. But what happens is if you look at the customer satisfaction associated with that, right? That's the other thing that Facebook hasn't necessarily published, but you can bet that they're looking at this internally because it's a really important measure. If you look at user satisfaction on the y-axis and the number of ads per user per day on the x-axis, and let's imagine user satisfaction. We're not going to quantify this numerically, but I've got a happy face up top and a sad face down bottom here. What this is going to do is it's going to say as you serve more ads per user per day, your user satisfaction is going to dip, and it's going to look sort of like a reverse S-curve. You can serve ads up to a certain point without the user experience being degraded and people being unhappy. But as you serve more and more ads, they're going to quickly become more and more unhappy. Until at some point, you've served so many ads that adding a few more ads isn't going to make them any more unhappy because they're already about as unhappy as they can be. And so again, I don't know the exact numbers that go into this, but you can bet Facebook is looking at this because what we're talking about, remember, is ad load and how many ads can they serve to their users to generate $15.25 per user per year, or $27.3 billion in revenue. And these are the kinds of things that you're going to look at if you're running that kind of business. They're going to be very concerned about the effective CPM that they can charge, and they're going to be very concerned about the ad load. So what does this mean for you? In summary, I think we have demonstrated quite quantitatively here that advertising works. Facebook's built a $360 billion some odd company on the backs of advertising, and it's an amazing business. It's growing quite well, and again, remember, 97% of their revenue comes from advertising. So we've clearly demonstrated that advertising works. And again, these advertisers are smart, media-savvy, marketing-savvy people. They're not going to spend billions or tens of billions of dollars on something if they don't believe and if they can't prove that it ultimately works. There's always a challenge to quantify exactly what components of your advertising work, but you know as a marketer, if you're not advertising, you're going to have lower sales. So advertising clearly works. High quality content matters too, and one of the things that Facebook is able to benefit from, and one of the reasons they're so valuable, is that they're able to harness high quality content from many different media companies around the world. As a matter of fact, that's what Social Flow does, is we work with these media companies, help them get their content out to Facebook, Twitter, and other social networks, and ultimately to monetize it as well, because getting your content out is nice, but what we really want to help you do is partake of this revenue that's coming in from advertising. And again, we wake up in the morning, we go to bed at night thinking about this kind of thing, thinking about media content on social and how it can be effectively monetized. And we would love to talk to you about how you can do better with your social monetization on Facebook and in other social networks. So we'd love to talk to you. So if you'd like to talk to us, please contact us. You can reach us by email at sales@socialflow.com. So we look forward to continuing the conversation with you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.